the $87 trillion reason US will take Greenland. That sounds unbelievable, right? But here's the real shock. This isn't speculation. This isn't a conspiracy theory. And it's not some future fantasy. The United States has already tried to buy Greenland before, publicly, at the highest political level, and today, the reasons are stronger than ever. Because Greenland isn't just ice anymore. It's leverage, it's defense, it's minerals, it's trade, and potentially, it's the key to controlling the next global power shift. So the real question isn't why Greenland matters. The real question is, why now? Why is America suddenly so serious about a frozen island most people can't even point to on a map? And why, despite Denmark's objections, does Washington believe this is a move it can't afford not to make? Stay with me, because once you see the full picture, Greenland stops looking like a remote territory and starts looking like the most valuable piece of land on Earth. Why Greenland is worth everything. Let's start with a simple truth most people miss. Greenland isn't valuable because of who lives there. It's valuable because of where it sits. 1. Geography is destiny. Greenland sits between North America and Europe, directly along the Arctic corridor, the shortest path between the world's major powers. For decades, this didn't matter much. Ice made the region inaccessible. Ships avoided it. Trade ignored it. But that world is gone. As Arctic ice melts, Greenland suddenly becomes a gateway, not a barrier. New shipping routes are opening across the top of the world, cutting travel between Asia and Europe by up to 40% compared to routes like the Suez Canal. That's not just faster, that's cheaper fuel, lower costs, fewer choke points, and massive leverage over global trade. And whoever controls those routes doesn't just move goods, they influence prices, supply chains, and geopolitics. This is why every major power is racing north. 2. The military reality. Nobody talks about now. Here's where things get serious. Greenland already hosts one of the most critical U.S. military installations on Earth, the Patuxent Space Base. This base isn't symbolic. It monitors missile launches, tracks objects in space, acts as an early warning shield for North America. During the Cold War, it was essential. Today, with hypersonic missiles and space warfare becoming real threats, it's even more important. Here's the uncomfortable truth for Washington. Right now, U.S. access to Greenland exists because Denmark allows it. And in geopolitics, access is never as secure as ownership. From a military planning perspective, that's a vulnerability. And the Pentagon doesn't like vulnerabilities. Let me put this bluntly. If Greenland were sitting next to Russia or China, there would be no debate. It would already be under firm control. 3. The $87 trillion beneath the ice. Now let's talk about the number that changes everything. $87 trillion. That figure isn't just minerals pulled out of thin air. It represents the combined long-term value of rare earth elements, critical minerals, oil and natural gas, strategic trade routes, military positioning, energy security, industrial independence. Greenland holds large deposits of rare earth minerals, materials essential for smartphones, EV batteries, wind turbines, fighter jets, missiles, advanced electronics. Here's the problem for the U.S. Right now, China dominates rare earth processing. That means America's clean energy transition, defense systems, and advanced manufacturing are deeply exposed to geopolitical risk. Greenland offers an alternative, not tomorrow, but in the decades ahead. And in geopolitics, decades matter. The moment this became real. In 2019, the world laughed when a U.S. president suggested buying Greenland. It sounded absurd, almost comedic, but behind closed doors, defense analysts didn't laugh. Energy planners didn't laugh. Strategists didn't laugh, because the logic made sense. And today, after war in Ukraine, supply chain breakdowns, sanctions, and rising global tensions, that logic looks even stronger. This wasn't a joke, it was a signal. Now, why Denmark can't simply say no, conflict and escalation. Here's where the story gets complicated. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but it's also self-governing. And Greenlanders have made one thing very clear. They don't want to be owned by anyone, not Denmark, not America. So how does the U.S. apply pressure without tanks or invasions? Through influence. 1. Economic pressure. Denmark depends heavily on alliances, especially NATO. The United States is NATO's backbone. Washington knows that. Trade pressure, defense negotiations, security cooperation, these are levers, not threats, but reminders. And history shows that when superpowers apply sustained pressure, smaller nations eventually face impossible trade-offs. 2. The NATO dilemma. Here's the uncomfortable paradox. If the U.S. pushed too hard, it could fracture NATO. But if it doesn't secure Greenland long term, it risks losing strategic advantage in the Arctic. That's a lose-lose scenario. So instead of force, the strategy becomes gradual. Increased investment, deeper military integration, expanded infrastructure, economic partnerships, political influence. Ownership doesn't have to be official to be effective. Think of it like this. You don't need to own the house if you control the locks, the security system, and the utilities. Why Russia and China are watching closely. This story isn't happening in a vacuum. Russia has militarized its Arctic coastline. China calls itself a near-Arctic state. Both see Greenland as critical. If the U.S. doesn't deepen its grip, someone else will try. And that's the fear driving urgency in Washington, because once influence is lost in the Arctic, it's almost impossible to regain. The environmental dilemma. There's another layer people rarely discuss. Mining Greenland isn't easy. The environment is fragile. The climate is extreme. Local communities are cautious, and rightly so. But here's the trade-off. No one wants to say out loud, if Greenland doesn't develop these resources, someone else eventually will, and the standards may be far worse. So the debate becomes less about whether development happens and more about who controls how it happens. The real endgame. So will America take Greenland? Not with troops, not overnight, not on paper. But influence doesn't need flags. Influence needs presence, infrastructure, dependence, time. And America has all four working in its favor. The Arctic is becoming the next center of gravity in global power, and Greenland sits right at the center of it. The world is changing faster than our maps. Trade routes are shifting. Resources are revalued. Power is moving north, and Greenland, once ignored, is now impossible to overlook. Whether it remains autonomous, tied to Denmark, or increasingly aligned with the United States, one thing is certain. The future of global power will pass through the Arctic, and those who understand that early will shape the world that comes next. If you want to understand the forces reshaping money, power, and geopolitics, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay curious, and remember, the coldest places on Earth often hide the hottest battles.